Do you remember telling the government during one of your meetings with them that you thought the people at the exchange were overly compliant?
I do.
Okay, and your view was there was too much compliance, right?
Yes.
It was excessive.
Yes.
And you recall telling the government that you thought the exchange could have taken more customers.
I think that's true.
In your view, the exchange was too conservative when it came to its own marketing about its services and products, right?
Yes.
And you felt the lawyers were making the decisions about marketing, right?
I did.
And they could have been doing much more marketing, but didn't, right?
They could have done some marketing, but didn't.
Right. You felt like they did virtually none.
Yes.
During your Wednesday meetings, which I believe were the compliance meetings, there were discussions about customer onboarding, right?
Yes.
What did the committee do with respect to assessing the risk of particular customers?
There's a process called regulatory mapping. That's what we did.
Okay, and you would assign customers who you were doing a regulatory mapping for a risk score?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so in order to get onto the exchange, this regulatory mapping process was designed to allow only trusted customers onto the exchange, right?
Yes. If you're referring to the risk scoring, yes. There were certain yes.
Yeah, and again, that was another part. I think, you correct me if I'm wrong. In your view, that was a bit overly restrictive, right?
It was. It had flaws.
Okay, now in the summer and fall of 2022, do you recall that new registrations for the exchange started to decline?
I do recall that.
Okay, and in your view, this was due in part to the lack of any marketing, right?
That's fair.
And isn't it true that you actually tried to get your father-in-law signed up to be able to purchase some tokens?
Yes. Yes. We did try that.
Okay, and it's because your father-in-law had a Venezuelan ID, right?
He had an expired Venezuelan ID. That's why he was unable to purchase it.
Sure, and that's what happened, right? So you tried to have him register with the exchange using that expired ID, right?
Right.
And in fact, you encountered issues, right?
Yes.
You encountered issues because of that KYC process we talked about before, right?
That's right.
And then you actually had him call the 24/7 hotline that we talked about, right?
The customer service line.
Customer service line. Thank you. You had him call the customer service line?
Yes.
And tried to work these issues out so that he could register to buy HCN, right?
I did.
And ultimately it turned out, as you said, that the ID was no longer valid, right?
That's right.
And he couldn't purchase them, right?
That's right.
You testified before you expected a grant of HCN, right?
A grant?
A grant that you were given HCN.
Oh, yes, yes.
Right, so you expected a grant of HCN, and when that didn't work, you tried to go through your father-in-law to purchase HCN.
No, that's not true. My father-in-law wanted to purchase HCN.
Oh, okay. Your father-in-law wanted to purchase HCN.
Yeah, it was $20 at that point. I wanted no part of it.
Okay, now at the point in time where you expected to have these tokens, and were upset you didn't get them, you couldn't have thought the tokens were all that bad, right?
At $20, they were.
Well, that's relative, right? You didn't want to pay $20 for it.
They were drastically overpriced.
When they were first launched, you wanted them at that price, fair?
That's fair.
Okay, how bad could they have been then? Couldn't have been that bad, right?
No.
Right, wasn't that bad of a product, right?
No, it wasn't a bad product.
Right, okay. Now, I'd just like to talk briefly about Armanino. Do you recognize the name of that company?
I do.
Okay, and who were they?
They're a Silicon Valley auditing group.
Okay, and what was their role?
I believe it was to audit the coins.
Okay, and they conducted in particular an audit of the HDO reserves, right?
They did.
Okay, and if we can just bring up GXBR 208, please. 208A. Okay, and this is an audit of the cash reserves, backing the HDO credits, right?
That's right.
Okay, and would you agree with me that this document, which is in evidence, shows that the dollar reserves exceed the total amount of HDO credits in circulation? That is, the top number is bigger than the bottom, than the number on the second line?
I agree with that.
Okay, and I believe you testified, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, that you didn't think that the Himalaya Exchange had anything to do with being anti-CCP, right?
The exchange? No.
Okay, and do you recall telling the government during your interviews with them that you understood that the CCP whistleblower movement was the basis for everything? Do you recall that?
I do not recall that.
Okay, let's see if we can refresh your recollection. If we could please bring up 3506 at 11. Okay, is that displayed on your screen, Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Okay, now does that refresh your recollection that you told the government that the whole CCP whistleblower thing was the basis for everything?
It does.
Okay, and in fact, William J.E. would talk about the anti-CCP whistleblower movement at Hamilton, right?
Yes, he would.
Right, and he told you about it, right?
He did.
Right, so you understood in fact that about 2/3 of the exchange's customers were based in China, right? Based on information that was made available to you?
They were.
Right, and that was the market, right? The main market?
2/3 of the market.
You testified earlier today that the anti-CCP movement had nothing to do with the exchange. And then we just read, and you just testified, that the anti-CCP movement was the basis of the whole thing. Okay, now are you aware of something called a DDoS attack?
Yes.
Okay, what's that?
That's when the servers for your web entities are attacked to try to knock you offline.
Right, okay. Now did the exchange experience DDoS attacks?
Yes.
Yeah, how many would you say, if you can count?
I'm not sure of the real numbers. I'm not sure of the hard numbers.
Okay, but it was an issue for the exchange, right?
It wasn't an issue because we had protections in place.
Right, well, Azim, the security guy, was pretty focused on the potential for DDoS attacks, right?
He was.
Or other bad party or bad actor attacks, right?
Correct.
Did you understand that that had anything to do with the anti-CCP whistleblower movement based on your time at the exchange?
It was talked about.
Right, it was talked about as perhaps being why the exchange was targeted, right?
Yes.